Hello, everybody, and welcome to WOTS Weekly Features. Today's guest is Anjula Gogia, bookseller extraordinaire at Toronto's beloved Another Story Bookshop. We'll be talking about the intersection of literature and social activism, including ways to go beyond the book list. I'm Sienna Tristan, and I'll be your host. WOTS Toronto operates on land that is the territory of the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nations, Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. This territory is the subject of the Dish with One Spoon at Wampum Belt Covenant, which is an agreement between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Confederacy of the Anishinaabe and Allied Nations to care for and share the resources around the Great Lakes in peace. We encourage you to educate yourself about the land that you live on, wherever you're tuning in from. So today we have our friend Anju from Another Story. Welcome. Thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you for having me, Sienna. It's fun to be here.
It's going to be a great time. So I want to jump right in and learn a little bit about the history of Another Story. It's got 30 years of history as an independent bookstore, and I would love to hear a little bit about that broad period of time.
Sure. So actually, it's over 30 years. I think we're at 34 right now.
Okay, yeah.
So it was started in 1987 by Sheila Kaufman, who was an extraordinary woman. She was the founder of Another Story, and it first started off as a small shop in the basement of another shop on the Danforth. And she has all these stories of, walking up the stairs and people going down the stairs to get kids' books that were very hard to find. We're talking late 80s, Toronto, not much in terms of diverse literature for children out there, for children and young adults. Now, Sheila Kaufman was someone who was also very connected. So she had a vision for the store that was a place for diverse children's books and a bookstore that was dedicated to social justice and equity. Sheila Kaufman herself was a longtime member of the NDP and very closely allied to the unions. So she had a long history in the city of working in the left, and that was reflected in the store. So the store then grew to be a storefront on the Danforth itself, really close to the music hall. And about 15 years ago, I think now, she moved it to Roncesvalles. And so it became a neighborhood fixture there. And the store really was a vision of Sheila Kaufman's. Sheila Kaufman herself was an activist, very active in the community with the Parkdale Activity Recreation Center. And the store followed her vision of politics on the left and diverse children's books. Now, she very sadly passed away during the 30th anniversary year in September 2017. It was of cancer. So we all knew this was coming, and she really wanted her legacy to continue beyond her time. And she basically handed the store over to two long-term employees and her brother. And they're now the three co-owners of the store, Eric McCall, Laura Ash, and Joel Kaufman. And Laura and Eric are really the ones who are there on the day-to-day running the things. And there's a group of other staff who really work together to, I'd say continue the vision that was Sheila's. Our tagline is educate, organize, resist. And we pride ourselves on being a bookstore that's focused on social justice, equity, and diversity. And that's reflected in the books that we carry and in the events that we do and the kind of activities that we're involved with.
Mm-hmm. We've been partnering with Another Story for a number of years now. We're very fond of everything that you folks do over at WOTS. We couldn't do what we do without you and the things that you make possible in Toronto, really, especially you're also like such a cornerstone of the Ronci community.
Yeah.
So it's really nice to actually get a little bit more context for where that began.
Yeah.
I didn't know it was in a basement. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, she's gone now, but she had all these fun stories of, people going down into the basement, down to the dungeons, right, to get these books. Thankfully, they came to see the light.
They came back up. Yeah.
Yeah.
So speaking of staff members, you've also spent quite a long time at Another Story, but you've also had a whole career as an activist bookseller before Another Story. So I'd love to hear a little bit about how you came into the team and about your experience with this bookshop.
Sure. So I started working at the Toronto Women's Bookstore back in 1995. And what started off as a one-year sort of temporary job became a lifelong love affair as a bookseller. And I ended up staying there until 2006. For about 8 of those years, 1998 to 2006, I was co-managing the Women's Bookstore and, really running it as if an owner would, along with my co-manager, May Louie. And so the Women's Bookstore was really a hub during those years for feminist, anti-racist, activist book selling and organizing. I left it in 2006. I went off and had some kids. In between, I also worked for Penn Canada, and I spent a number of months working for Between the Lines, which is a lefty press here in Toronto. And about 9 years ago, my daughter was 4, and I knew I wanted to start working again. I had been a stay-at-home mother for 4 years. And I walked into Another Story, and I looked at the books, and I thought, this is who I am. I'm a bookseller. And I had known Sheila the whole time I'd been at the women's bookstore, as similar bookstores. We were, we'd see each other at events. She would bring 30 tables to Word on the Street to sell books. I would bring 8. And I would always look at her in jealousy. We had this, funny sort of activist lefty rivalry. We'd see each other at the International Women's Day, tables. And she would always bring 3 times the amount of books that I would, even in the bookstore. So
a friendly rivalry, an encouraging rivalry.
But we had so much respect for each other. So when I was ready to go back to work, I walked into Another Story, and I thought, this is what I love doing. I love selling books. And we chatted, and I came back to work there. So this was probably about 9 years ago now. I gave birth to my second child, my son, a year after I started working there. And, Sheila was amazing. I really credit her to sort of allowing me to have my career back in a balanced way, because having a newborn, I couldn't work full time, but I started working part-time, and I started being the bookshop's event coordinator, which worked really well because I could do a lot of that work from home, and then, go in the evenings and weekends to present events. So I've been organizing ASB's events for the last 8 years. And we've done I think we've had some incredible events. And over the last 15 months, I've been very involved with just retail book selling, and, pivoted to being in the store a lot, selling books via online orders.
What is one event that you think was like really hit it out of the park? Like one of your personal favorites, like, oh, I can't believe we got to pull this off.
Arundhati Roy. So Arundhati Roy, when I was working at the women's bookstore, she had published The God of Small Things. It became an international bestseller, but then she became a political writer and started publishing a lot of, very progressive critical nonfiction. And I had been asking her agent, Anthony Arnav, to do an event with her at TWB for years. And she never came to Toronto. Well, in 2017, Penguin Random House was publishing her second novel, The Ministry of Utmost Happiness. And I was determined to do that launch in Toronto because I'd been harassing her agent for 15 years. So we did get the event, and this was probably one of the first very large-scale events Another Story Bookshop had done. It was a lifelong dream of mine to present her. And it was a sold-out event at Trinity St. Paul's Church. We had 1,100 people. We had hundreds of people outside. Wow. It was an incredible night. We asked Ali Kazemi to do the onstage interview, and he did a wonderful job. I was told before the event that there were death threats for her book tour across North America and Europe. So I was told to get security 2 weeks before the event. So we had to hire security guards, and I had to give a very stern speech during the opening remarks. And I got to meet her, which was incredible. And I think her novel was incredible, and her talk was incredible. It was a real congregation, I would say, of 1,000 people who were there, people from the activist community, the lefty community, the South Asians, the progressive people who loved her writing. And for me, it meant so much to me, because she epitomizes so much of who I am as an activist bookseller and the reason why I do this work, right? So that was definitely a highlight. And 2 weeks after that, we launched Roxane Gay's memoir, Hunger. So that was
what a busy time.
It was busy. It was a busy 2 weeks. Yeah.
But enjoyable. That does sound like a dream come true, honestly, especially after the years of persistence.
Yeah, it was.
To have it finally pay off in such a magnificent way. That's fantastic. Yeah. So I want to hear a little bit about, I know that we've mentioned that Another Story has especially a whole bunch of children's literature that's very diverse and centers equity and social activism. How in your career have you seen literature contribute to social activism, to equity, especially literature that is geared towards children? I know that sometimes people can get up at a fuss about like, oh, how do we explain these complicated things to children? But I feel that there's plenty of ways to do it. And, some of those are on the shelves at Another Story. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Well, I mean, it's a cliche, right? We say children, we start with children, and that is very, very true, right? Everything that we do has to start with engaging and I wouldn't say educating, but engaging and learning and motivating children and young adults, right? So we pride ourselves, we have probably the best collection of books for children and youth on diversity and social justice and activism. You can browse our shelves online. We have a whole browse our shelves section, so you can go on and see the different sections that we have. And we get a lot of requests for books for young kids about race, about racism, about Indigenous history, right? And and I'm a mother now, so I can see it with my own kids. Seeing themselves reflected in literature is absolutely key to their sense of self-worth and self-esteem, right? And it's one of the most important things that we can do to, I think, create a generation of readers and a culture of communities, right, where we care about each other and we understand each other, and that we can respect what is going on in each other's lives by understanding what that is. And books are one of the prime ways of doing that, right? Books are so key to doing that because, you sit down with a child and read a book and it opens up a whole new world, right? So this is why it's so important to what we do, right? And for us, it's not just the books that talk about, like, we've had so many questions from people who come into the store who say, I want a book about, Black communities in Canada that's not about Rosa Parks or not about Viola Desmond. That's not about marching and protesting, right?
Yeah.
That's about just being and laughing and playing and being in community, right? And that's the kind of stories that we need so many more of, right? Canadian authored books for Black children, for Indigenous children, and for children of color, for queer and non-binary children, to see themselves reflected. It's a difference between staying alive and not, right? I've had so many people who have come to me to say, I used to come to the women's bookstore and just sit in your trans section and read, and I wouldn't want to kill myself, right?
Yeah.
And this is how fundamental it is, right? I remember a book launch that we did for Corey Silverberg, who is the author of What Makes a Baby and Sex is a Funny Word, which are great children's books, teaching children about sex and sex education, right? And consent. And I remember at the book launch for Sex is a Funny Word, which was at the store, it was totally packed. He said, everything that you're going to teach your kids about sex and consent has to happen by the time they're 8, right? And child development will tell you this, right? By the time they're 7 or 8, that's when a lot of that happens. So it's so critical to get our children to be reading this, to get the schools to be reading this, right? And Sex is a Funny Word is one of our best-selling books about, bodies and difference and consent for young children. So these are the children that are going to grow up and be in the world. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. As a queer person, as a non-binary person, as a neurodivergent person, I wish that there had been this sort of wealth of, story that was like put in front of me, because it did definitely take me a long time to finally find representation and sort of reparent like my younger self into being like, no, it's okay. Look, like there is space for you in this space. And now I also am coming to the space where it's nice to find queer stories that are not just coming out stories. So I can totally hear and understand what you say about like stories that aren't just about pain or aren't just about the suffering or not just for like an audience of everybody else, as opposed to you yourself, the audience.
You need to see yourself reflected in the complexity of who you are, right? Like one of our favorite kids' books is Julian is a Mermaid and Julian at the Wedding, right? Which is such a sweet kids' book about a young non-binary child of color, right? Just moving through the world and dancing with their families and just being, right? And you need that kind of absolute positivity, right? You need it to make children feel heard and understood, and for communities to see those children as well, right? For who they are.
And it seems like a lot of the books as well, Another Story has a really good grasp on showing intersectionality in these stories as well. So, to speak of multiply marginalized individuals, it's not just one thing or another thing. There's sometimes talk, which is ridiculous, that like, oh, this is too complicated. Like you're too many things.
It's not.
And it's completely ridiculous. Exactly. It's absurd.
It's absolutely not. It's absolutely not. Children get this, right? Yeah. It's the parents and the families and the educators and the teachers that have a hard time with it. Yeah.
So I would love to hear personally from you if there's any issue that you would like to put a particular spot on right now in this moment in sort of our cultural context, and what are some books or authors that you would recommend to help people familiarize themselves with that, what's going on there?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think we have to start with the fact of acknowledging and learning about Canada's genocidal relationship with Indigenous communities, right? I think anything that we do has to start with that. So some books that would, I think, speak to that are This Place, which is a great graphic novel comic book for young adults called This Place, 150 Years Retold. And we've sold tons of those to schools. So that's great for children. There are so many new children's books coming out written by Indigenous writers. Treaty Words, Julie Flett's books, Bird Songs, I Saw You from the Stars, I Sang You Down from the Stars, Richard Van Camp's books, We Sang You Home, Monique Gray Smith's, there's so many. So I would start with some of those. And for adults, Warrior Life, I love Pamela Palmater. I've launched a lot of her books. She's kick-ass.
We've worked with Pam before. She truly is.
Pam is a phenomenal speaker, and her newest book is called Warrior Life, put out by Fernwood Press. So I would highly recommend that. Nishka by Jordan Abel, which is being launched next Monday. It's a memoir. It's fantastic. And 21 Things You May Not Know About the Indian Act. So I would say we have to start with our relationship, our genocidal relationship with Indigenous communities. So that's the first thing. And I think right now there's a lot of books that we have about what's happening in Israel and Palestine that people might want to read. So Jeff Halper, who is an activist from Israel, has a new book out called Decolonizing Israel, Liberating Palestine. Mm-hmm. There's another book out called Except for Palestine by Mark Lamont and Mitchell Plitnick, and also Revolutionary Feminisms, which is an edited collection by Brenna Bhandar and Rafif Ziadeh. So I think that would be good. And, given what's happened, I think, everyone has been interested in learning about, Black history and Black Canadian history. So there's some excellent books there. There's right now a huge push around discussion around abolition and prison abolition. So We Do This Till We Free Us by Miriam Kaba has been a bestseller, and it's excellent. Policing Black Lives by Robin Maynard, Black Life by Ronaldo Walcott and Idil Abdullahi, and Ronaldo Walcott's new books on property and long emancipation, Angry Queer Somali Boy, and one of my current favorite novels is this one here, Francesca Equiasi's Butter Honey Pig Bread, which has been nominated for several awards, and I loved it. I loved it. Mm-hmm. I loved it. So that's one that I would also recommend.
I'm going to add one last one.
Go on.
We could go on forever, right? There's so many good, sumptuous, delicious things to chomp into. For those of you who are listening at home, next month in July, we have a City Imagines this evening for Fieldways, which is a fantastic anthology of Scarborough writers. But next month, we are going to be featuring Indigenous Toronto stories that carry this place, which is a fantastic anthology coming out from Coach House.
Yeah, I should have mentioned that. We've sold tons of Indigenous Toronto. We profiled it on our Instagram, and it's on our window, and we can't keep up with the amount of orders. It's fantastic.
Really excited to discuss. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So this is a fantastic book list, and I can't wait until we put this together. Like, here it is, and I'll toss it into the YouTube description after I do captioning. But one thing that I also want to talk about is that often well-meaning people can sort of halt they stall their activism at the book list stage. Yeah. There was an article that came out recently on Open Book that talked about going beyond the book list and talking about ways to further evolve, your activism and your citizenship beyond just sort of reading and educating yourself. You said earlier that the motto for Another Story Bookshop is educate, organize, resist. And I want to talk a little bit about those second two instead of just sort of pausing at the educate. So what in your sort of experience are some ways that people can advance into more active forms of social justice after they have done some of this reading?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question, because reading isn't enough. And posting, like the article said in Open Book, posting hashtags and posting pictures is definitely not enough. So I think you have to figure out which issues you want to get involved with. There's lots of things you can do. Donate money. That's an easy thing. If you don't have the time or the energy, but you've got some extra funds, donate some money, right? Yeah. We're in a pandemic, so it's not so easy to get out on the streets, but you can do things like write letters, right from home, write to your MPs, write to your MPPs, write, email, call, right? Talk to your friends, sign online petitions. But I really think there's a lot of ways to put pressure on our governments for change, right? And people are still out there protesting. So if that's something that you feel safe to do, right now, you can get out there on the streets and protest, right? There's a number of incredible organizations in Toronto. Some of them the Workers' Action Center has been front and center around the push for paid sick leave in the province of Ontario. And they also do a lot of work around supporting precarious workers, right? Working racialized. So we're looking at the pandemic and who is it affected, right? Precarious, racialized, undocumented workers, right?
The same groups as always.
Yeah. So you can look to see what the Workers' Action Center is doing. They do lots of actions. You can join them. Food Share is an incredible organization, right? In Toronto's West End that has been doing a lot of support work around food security, right? It's headed by Paul Taylor. The bookstore has a long-standing relationship with Park, which is a Parkdale Activity Recreation Center. So go see what they're up to, right? There's a lot of things going on with encampments in Toronto, right? Around abolition. So I think there's a number of ways to get involved, and there's a number of groups. So look to see what issue you want to get involved with and move forward with that, right?
I think that's a really great, the first step is identify what it is that you really want to put the full force of your work behind, because there's just infinite things that are out there that need our care and our attention and our support. And burnout is a real thing, especially for the people who are impacted by the issues that we're trying to combat. And so I think it's always great advice when you're getting started to like pick one or two things that you have a really deep connection to and just sort of go hard with that.
Yeah.
And then as you build capacity, you can sort of branch out into other things that call you.
Yeah, exactly. And the bookstore itself, I mean, I consider myself an activist bookseller, and the bookstore has done a lot of things beyond just selling books, right? Back in 2019, we hosted a teach-in by the Porcupine Warriors for Wet'suwet'en, and that weekend we donated 10% of our sales to one of the legal funds that was supporting the Wet'suwet'en defense. We, over the Christmas holidays, we always do gift wrapping, but by donation to Park. When the Toronto Public Library, when there was the talk by Megan Murphy and there was a big uproar by the queer and trans and their allies communities, we organized a large trans teach-in at the 519. And that recording is now on our YouTube channel. So this is something that, we are, we try and go beyond the just selling of books. Adam Pottle, who's a deaf writer out west, he had an issue with his publisher where there was a racist image in his book, and he was actually asking people not to buy that book.
To purchase the book.
So we wrote an open letter of support for him, asking the publisher to, reconsider what they did. And we put that out on social media, and that helped to snowball some other support, right? So there's a lot of things people can do, right? And we do as a bookstore as well.
Exactly. So I wanted to close this out. It's been a fantastic conversation. I feel so fired up now. Which is the point, yeah? But how can people engage with the work that Another Story is doing? Like, what have you got going on? Are there events or things that people can come and participate in and sort of come into this community that you've built over 35 years almost?
Yeah. So definitely check out our website, anotherstory.ca. We're still doing a lot of virtual events. The next one is Jordan Abel's Nishka on May 25th, so you can join that. We just launched The Street Belongs to Us and The Queer Evangelist by Sherry DeNovo. So those will hopefully be up on our YouTube channel soon. Buy books, educate yourself, follow us on our feeds, because we also do post like when there was the killing of several Asian women out in the States, we posted links on our Instagram page for groups like Butterfly, which is a group run by Asian sex workers here in Toronto, right? That had certain actions that you could take. So we do occasionally post on our feeds different sort of activist opportunities.
Resources.
Right? Yeah, and resources. So follow us. We hope to get back to doing live events. And for me, live events are such an important way of building community, right? And we love our live events, and they're really important to who we are. So, and they're a way of building community. So we will get back to that place. And when we can, join us for those, right? Because you'll get to meet people, you'll get to see things, you'll get to, learn about activism, and you'll get to be in community, which psychically is so important, especially
have an embodied experience of it. Exactly. Yeah. Listeners at home, mark your calendars. It's going to happen. I will be there. Anju will be there. We're going to make it happen.
Yeah.
From one event coordinator to another. This has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you for having me. It was lovely to be here. And thanks for all that you do. We love Word on the Street. You guys do great work. So thank you.
Thanks all around. We're all doing our best.
Yeah.
Take care, Anju.
Take care.
And for everybody at home, thank you for listening. This has been today's WOTS Weekly Feature. You can explore Another Story's many virtual shelves at anotherstory.ca. The conversations about community involvement will continue next week for our Local Communities Week. For discounts and deals, you can check out toronto.thewordonthestreet.ca/weekly-features. From all of us to you, thank you so much and happy Indie Bookstore Week.